Hi, this is Natalie Kingston, and you're listening to the Cinematography Podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography Podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey there, Ben Rock. How are you doing today?
I'm doing ducky. How are you doing?
Ducky. Wow. All right. I'm doing okay. We got another fine episode of the Cinematography Podcast. On the show today is Natalie Kingston, who I believe you had the pleasure of talking to.
Yeah. I talked to her. She is Emmy nominated for Blackbird, which you can watch right now on Apple TV. It's pretty awesome.
Woohoo. Congratulations on the nomination, Natalie. That's cool. Ben, tell everyone who you are and what do you do?
Who do you think you are is a better question. Who the hell do I think I am?
Who are you today?
I'm Ben Rock. You can find everything you want to know about me at benrock.com. I'm a director, writer, frequently editor. I like to say I do horrific and comedically horrific things usually, but and also, but on the occasion that people hire me to do corporate work, I do very sincere corporate work. Very exactly what the client wants.
You're also a podcaster of many flavors. In addition to this podcast, you are sometimes featured on other people's podcasts. And of course, you do pretty incredible narratives, long form stories for, fine networks like Audible
and Shudder. Yeah, we did a long form one called Video Palace that's on Shudder. You can get it probably wherever you got this podcast. You can get it there for free. It's a horror fiction podcast if you're into that kind of thing. I'm quite proud of the way it turned out. And then last year we did a project for Audible called Catchers. That's more of a straightforward audio drama, but also monstery. Monstery is all hell. Lots of monsters. Excellent. How about yourself, Ilya? Introduce yourself to the nice people.
My name's Ilya Friedman. I've got a company called Hot Rod Cameras. We sell basically anything that has to do with photons. Cameras, lenses, lights, things that emit photons, things that process photons, things that capture photons. That's really an overly complicated way. We sell equipment to the motion picture and television industry, and we build studios. So on several occasions now, we've done full studio build outs for all kinds of people. Find people who work in traditional media and creator economy and new media stages and corporations and stuff like that. So we build studios, we sell gear, and you can find us at hotrodcameras.com. So
I like the photon thing. I've never heard you talk about the photon thing, and I feel like we should get into an acrimonious argument about whether or not light is a particle or a wave.
It's a particle. It just sort of behaves sometimes like a wave.
It's both, motherfucker.
It can be
It's
both,
a particle
for sure.
and a wave.
Yeah, we can go down that path, but I think we will lose 99% of our audience if we start talking too much about photons. So let's get into our close focus.
And now, close focus.
There's a lot of stuff that's been going on in the industry, but it sounds like there might be some thawing in the strike. So
a light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. An AMPTP proposal that was reported as we're recording this just hours ago in Variety, that the AMPTP has kind of come to the table with, let's say, some concessions to the Writers Guild.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting. I think that the writers are probably a little surprised and taken aback, and we'll see where it goes from here. That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm curious what do you think the over-under is that by the time this episode posts to find out that they've settled the strike or that they're closer to settling the strike?
I don't know if we're quite there yet, but I think the concessions are a good step in the right direction, and maybe the AMPTP. I hate to use the word producers because that's not really what they are. But there's a lot of conversations actually right now about getting rid of the P in the AMPTP.
To make it C.
Yeah, exactly. Companies.
Yeah, but let's go over what a couple of the concessions that it appears might be on the table if the Writers Guild is willing to go. By the way, before we even get too deep into this, they still have to go through this whole thing again with the SAG. It's going to be a whole separate thing.
That's true. SAG. But the writers have been on strike a lot longer, and I think it probably makes sense for them to come back to them first and maybe wrap up that part of the strike before the actors. I don't think they want to be, fighting a war on two fronts, so to speak. I think they'd probably prefer to, end one before addressing the other. I could be wrong, though.
So one of the things that writers were upset about were called mini rooms. The so-called mini rooms where they would be restricted as to the number of writers they could have on their staff. And a lot of those staff writers weren't there for the shoots and they weren't as involved. And honestly, it was hurting the AMPTP companies just about as much as it was hurting the Writers Guild, in my opinion, because what they were doing was getting rid of the farm league. They were getting rid of the writers who were going to be the showrunners in 5 years' time. So one of the things that the AMPTP has offered is that the showrunners basically can have the authority to set the size of their staff.
Yeah, that's a big deal because they were really concerned they weren't going to have any staff at all and were going to be told like, hey, just use some sort of AI software and have a nice day.
Yeah. One of the things that was also reported is that there will be greater transparency in streaming numbers, a thing that we've talked about on here before, but... And I think this is like a little bit of a middle finger. They refuse to tie residuals to performance of an individual show. So if you're a writer on whatever show on Netflix or Amazon Prime, if you're a writer on The Rings of Power and it's killing it and 5 billion people watch it, you're probably going to get the same residual as if 5 people watch it.
Yeah. What's interesting, they did indicate that they would increase residuals similar or basically the same level they did for the Directors Guild, which was a 21% increase. But I understand that it's already starting at such a small level. We're talking about very small dollar amounts. And then those increases work out to be like 5%, 4%, or 3.5% above the minimums. It's not a big change. But they did also agree to create a higher tier of minimums for writer producers, which is a lot of people out there who are both a writer and a producer, or producers who are writing a show. And so to have a higher tier minimum for them, I think that's probably a real good step in the right direction. Also, apparently in this Variety article, they mention that AI concerns have been addressed. They don't really get into the nut meat of how. But I don't believe that it's even on the table anymore that AI could write a show or that you could have a smaller writing staff and require the showrunner to, use ChatGPT or whatever to generate a bunch of outlines that then your smaller staff would have to go off and write. So I know that the WGA is basically going to fall on its sword over the AI thing. I think that they would sooner cave on residuals than AI because residuals are a thing that gets negotiated every 3 years. But the AI thing is, I think, an existential threat to the Writers Guild. And, I've been talking to people about a lot of this stuff with regards to SAG and the Writers Guild. And why did the DGA, and I say this as a DGA member, why did we roll over and let the AMPTP scratch our belly so quickly? And I think it's because it's harder to replace directors with AI, and not just directors, but directors, assistant directors, unit production managers. I think all of us will have AI in our workflow, but you're not going to have an AI robot on set directing the actors. You could theoretically have an AI that makes the whole show, and there is no set because it's all computer generated. Every attempt at that I have seen runs the gambit from looking like ass to looking amusingly surreal, but not like a real thing. You couldn't make a movie with it now. And everyone I talk to is like, yeah, but see where it's going. And I'm like, I don't actually know where it's going. Like, maybe it's a lack of imagination on my part. No, I think your realism is set in for you. I think that a lot of people feel exactly the same way, that that existential threat is a long way down the road. It is not here today.
But the existential threat for writers, I think, is right there. Like, it's true. It's right on the edge.
Yeah,
and I think that to a degree with actors, like when they're talking about scanning extras and stuff like that technology isn't perfect yet, but I could see it getting there. And if you gave them that leeway to do that, then maybe they would.
Ultimately, I think there's a big issue, though. The big issue about the AI replacing entertainment is that it has to be creating something that people actually want to watch, and it has to be good. And there's not a lot of emotion by creating an AI rendered generative AI, supermodel or an interesting image or whatever it might be. To actually have some sort of like emotional engagement is a bridge too far for any sort of AI right now. And I don't see it accelerating. I keep being reminded of the Mechanical Turk, if you know the story of the Mechanical Turk.
Oh, yeah.
Which, is a famous put on that someone basically came up with this machine. They told everyone it was a machine and it could beat almost everyone in chess. Turns out there was actually a very small person inside the machine controlling it, and they did a very good job of disguising that there was a person in there. So it was a human that was conning people at the chessboard. I feel like AI, especially like the Chat GPTs of the world, are a very good Mechanical Turk, and that it's got a trick That's a pretty impressive trick. But once you know the trick, it suddenly becomes far less impressive overall. And I
agree. And like, I even say this as a person who, I love Midjourney and I love messing around with it. But Midjourney, after you've played around with Midjourney for a while and you see an interesting Midjourney image, you can pick it out. You know, you're not fooled by Midjourney very easily.
I agree. I also think it's a little bit weird for, I've been contacted by people who said, hey, check out my cool AI art. I know you've done this for me. And I do think the art is very cool. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit weird when people take credit for the creation of that art.
Well, so, I will say that, like, I do not act like what I'm doing is art.
No, and you did not take any credit, but I've had other people say to me, like, "Cool, check out this cool thing I created," and I was like, "Did you create it really?"
Like,
it's a novelty. You made the prompt.
I'm not a fine artist because I typed "hell is filled with meat clowns" and then I let Midjourney turn that into an image. And no way.
And that was a very scary image. It sure was. Anyway,
I've probably typed that one in there like 200 times. I see all kinds of possibilities for generative AI, not just in art. I mean, actually in film at some point. But I feel like there's always going to be a person operating it. Like you said, it is a mechanical Turk. I think that's actually the most perfect way I've heard anyone describe how this is. And I keep hearing like, well, it's going to replace us. It's going to replace us. It's like, at a certain point, it's only derivative. It's not predictive. It's not coming up with new stuff. It's not even really combining stuff that somebody doesn't tell it to combine. It's not thinking of it. It's not creative. It hasn't loved and lost. It hasn't wrecked a car. It hasn't had a mother who didn't approve of its career choice. Like, I just don't feel like it has an emotional basis in it. How many times have we heard that so-and-so has an algorithm that can predict what scripts will be successful or can tell you what would be a good storyline? And at the end of the day,
they all fail. Relativity
Zero
being
of
the
them
most,
work.
Relativity Studios being, another one of those high flyers that had a lot of fanfare and said that they had this system that could always pick the winners. And how many years ago was it now Relativity went under? So I don't know. It's one of those things.
Here's my theory about it, and I'm going to try and keep this short, but I feel like art in general goes in these cycles where it starts getting overproduced and overproduced and overproduced, and then someone comes along and does it with no resources, and everyone gets excited about that. So
I think we're heading towards that again.
All of Hollywood up to like the late 60s, then Easy Rider completely screws everyone up. Then, stuff starts getting, through the 70s, it was all gritty and grungy. And then 80s, it starts getting super slick again. And then the American independent movement and stuff like Kevin Smith and Steven Soderbergh come in with stuff that's raw and real and fresh and different. You can love it. You can hate it. Richard Linklater is another one of them.
And I feel like you could throw the Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity and a bunch of other stuff in that same sort of vein as well.
And I think the same thing happens in music. You get like overproduced disco, overproduced glam rock, and then punk rock comes along. And then it gets, the next 10 years, it gets overproduced, and then grunge comes along. I think that what happens is that audiences start to respond to stuff that feels immediate again.
Authentic
and this stuff
and real.
Is never, there's nothing... Again, I'll be happy to. I won't be happy because I won't have a career anymore.
You'll eat your words.
I will eat my words the day that AI can make something that's, like Meryl Streep level, moving and genuine and feels real. Like, and I just, Yeah,
and I'm not going to patronize AI that is not that. In fact, there's so much stuff online that it's like, hey, look, it's someone who figured out where the slow-mo button was on their phone. I don't really care anymore. I don't need to see another one of that. I need to see something that I have an emotional reaction to, that someone actually, put some intention behind, and they did something real, and I enjoyed it. I don't need to see another slow motion phone being dragged through a puddle. That's the last thing I need.
I'll take all the slow-mo phones through the puddle. Anyway, so let's move on to our interview with Natalie Kingston.
Let's do it.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
So I'm here. We're in the same town, but over Zoom, as is our custom these days, with Natalie Kingston, Emmy nominated for Blackbird. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell our audience about Blackbird if they haven't heard of it. I mean, I feel like we are so consumed right now, and God knows after the strike, it probably won't be the case anymore. But I feel like we're barraged with amazing high-end peak TV kind of stuff. And Blackbird is a great crime thriller, but give us the basic pitch of it.
Yeah, so Blackbird is, like you said, it's a crime thriller. It's based on a true story. It's about this guy, Jimmy Keene, who in the 90s was busted for a bunch of drugs and guns. He got a 10-year sentence. And in his first year of serving time, the FBI approached him basically with a deal if they were to move him to Springfield Prison, this high security prison for the criminally insane, as they call it, to befriend this serial killer who they suspected to be a serial killer and get a confession out of him, then they would free him and he wouldn't have to serve the rest of his term. Yeah, so the series is really about this kind of unexpected, weird, creepy relationship between Jimmy Keene and Larry Hall, played by Taron Egerton and Paul Walter Hauser.
Yeah, and I should also say one of the other stars is the late, great Ray Liotta.
Yes.
And he's excellent. I mean, the whole cast is excellent, but it's kind of heartbreaking because he was such a unique talent.
Yeah, I know. Well, I couldn't believe it when I heard it. And rest in peace, Ray. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, it was. I'm really honored I got to do it. It was intimidating at first, and but he's just such a down-to-earth guy, so real. Yeah. And he rarely went back to his trailer, in between setups, and would just stay on set and watch us light, ask questions, and it.
Really?
He really liked to be a part of the filmmaking process, like he was a filmmaker, and I thought that was really cool.
Tell me, what brought you to the show? How did you end up on the show?
So it kind of came out of nowhere, honestly. I hadn't done TV before. This is my first TV series.
That was one of the things I noticed. Yeah, you've got features and stuff, but and you did the whole series. There's we talked to a lot of DPs on here who they shot the pilot or they shot the bulk of the series or they alternated, but you did the whole thing. That's like making a 4 or 5 hour movie.
Yeah, exactly. And so when it popped on my desk, I thought they were looking for one cinematographer to shoot the whole thing. And I thought it was pretty far-fetched just because I didn't have, any TV experience. But it was a producer I'd worked with before recommended me to the Blackbird team. And my first meeting was with Mikkel Roscom, who directed the first 3 episodes. And we just hit it off, shared a lot of the same filmmaking sensibilities, and we just had just an instant chemistry, and we had just a very good conversation. So after that, I had a meeting with Dennis Lehane and the rest of the producers, and they liked what I had to say and what I presented, and we're very much in line. And so it all just happened very fast after that. Just got on a plane and flew to New Orleans where we shot, and which is coincidentally where I'm from. And,
oh, cool.
So it just, they totally trusted me, which was just an amazing opportunity for my first TV series to be able to, create the look from scratch and maintain it throughout. And really, really proud of the work.
What were the biggest lessons that you learned moving to doing a full series like this based on your previous experience? What are the things that if you could send back in time and say, make sure to do this, or here's where it's going to be, this is going to be awesome, or this is going to be very difficult? What are some of those things?
So many. I mean, Blackbird was such a transformative experience, I think there was who I was before Blackbird and then after.
Oh, really?
And it was just, it was such a long period of time too. It was 7 months all in, with prepping and shooting. It was nearly 100-day shoot, so just the sheer length of time alone, my longest feature was right under 30 days before that. And I knew that going in, okay, this is going to be a marathon and this will be just a real test of and my heart has always been in long form, but this is ultra long form. But I think one of the biggest things is just the way TV is structured. There's the showrunner entity that you don't have in features. It's the director is sort of the end all be all and as far as making creative decisions and such. But as a cinematographer, you really have to kind of, you're in the middle between the directors and the showrunner, and ultimately the showrunner has the final say. And in this case in Blackbird, this is Dennis Lehane's baby, and he wrote all the scripts, and and it was his vision. And so it's just finding that balance of how to collaborate with both and making sure everyone's happy. And then just this was the largest project that I had done. There's, a lot more crew and a lot more resources. Yeah. And so just the management of that situation. And I think I really thrived in that because I do well with a large crew and I do well delegating, but then also just getting used to so many people that you have to talk to get one thing done, not just in my departments, but across all of the other departments.
Yeah.
It's really big.
Yeah, I always wonder about the steering and ocean linerness of it. And on your website or whatever, when you look you up online, it's like you're always holding the camera. And, you know, on a show like this, were you able to operate, or did you have to sit in Video Village? Yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, I was like in the beginning thinking of, you know, toying with the idea of operating because I've always operated. And so I couldn't imagine not operating. It's like, where do I sit? What do I do during a take if I'm not operating? It's just such an ingrained part of me. And, you know, and I came up shooting a lot of documentaries in the beginning. And camera is really an extension of my body and myself and the way I see things. So, but after speaking to other DPs who had done TV and getting the advice from them, they advised that I did not operate. And it was best to just, you know, step back. And they were right. So I made the decision to hire two operators. We had 2 cameras most of the time. Sometimes it was single. But, you know, yeah, just because of the sheer scope of it all, it just, it was much more efficient and just better, you know, across the board for me to just step back and orchestrate. And a lot of times, you know, it's like while we're lighting a scene or something, I might have to talk to the rigging gaffer who's visiting the set to plan certain things ahead of time and taking that time on set to do that. Or if I was stuck behind the camera, that, you know, may not be able to happen. So it was the right decision. I got in the flow of it. I bring my own Flanders monitor to every project because I don't really like getting stuck in the DIT tent. I just feel very removed from set. So I like to have my Flanders just up close while I'm lighting. So that was always just right by camera with iris wheels, and I would sit there. So yeah.
No one's ever told me that they brought their own monitor to set. So how is this working? Like, do you like your own Flanders monitor because you have it calibrated?
Yeah, exactly. And it's one less variable. And so it's either right next to the director. But usually by the director, there's scripty and other people. Yeah. And so that gets crowded. So I like to have my own, like I said, with the iris wheels, and gaffer and key grip can sit next to me. So it's but sometimes Video Village can be too far away. So I like to be as close as possible. Yeah. Interesting.
So how much of a challenge was it for you as someone who's used to operating to hand the steering wheel to a different operator? Were you watching their operation being like, no? Or was it like collaborating with yet another artist and like seeing the possibilities that each one of them brought to what you were doing?
Yeah, at first it was like, you know, it was hard. It was just because it was a totally new way of working. And I felt so like kind of stuck behind the monitor and not, you know, getting to get my hands on camera. But once I kind of, you know, got used to it, then yes, it was much more of a collaboration. And I had 2 great operators, Colin McDonald and Matt Bell, who were very collaborative and shared similar sensibilities. So yeah, it was very easy to work with them, and it became fun. It became nice because I knew I could just tell them what I wanted, and I could walk away and trust that it would be set up the way I intended or better. And that was nice and freeing to be able to walk away and know that they could just handle it and I could focus on lighting.
Well, like now moving forward, do you see yourself as someone who would gravitate more towards working with an operator, or do you want to get your hands on the camera again?
Yeah, so I just wrapped a film and I hired an operator and we kind of split the duty. So I jumped in whenever I felt like I just needed to operate, but he operated most of the time and it made sense for that project. So I don't think I'll give up operating completely, but it'll probably just be on a per project basis. But I do like to step back, and sometimes it is nice not to get bogged down with just, you know, the little thing, especially when you have a really good operator who you can trust, you know, to work with the on-set dressers, to get everything in the frame, and people who are paying attention to all of those little details is like I would do, because I could be obsessive with, you know, every single thing in the frame. Yeah, that's nice to be able to give that off to someone.
So let's dive a little bit more into Blackbird. It's a period piece. It's a 90s piece, which as a person of the 90s always makes me happy, just for nothing else, just the needle drops, all the music that's going to be in a show like this or Yellow Jackets, where we're living in the 90s. But when you're approaching a period piece like this, what do you think is your operating philosophy about how to photograph it? Was there any discussion with you and the showrunners, directors, whatever, about the basic approach and like the role of camera in the show?
Not really in terms of the 90s period. Yeah, I wasn't trying to force a 90s look, if you will, you know, with the way I lit things or frame things or anything like that, or overly grading things in a certain way. I think, you know, a lot of that came through with our locations and production design and costume design and
For sure.
And hair and makeup.
Cars and hair and computer monitors.
Cars, exactly, computer, all of that stuff, music, you know, and that did a lot of the heavy lifting. So I felt like I really didn't need to do anything else on the cinematography end to reinforce that.
So how is the camera interacting with the world then? Is it a participant? Like, how were you approaching it? What was the role of camera in the storytelling of the show?
Yeah, so it's the role of the camera was never to be judgmental. It was an earnest camera, but also subjective at the same time, if that makes sense. So it was never to create like a very theatrical presentation of a serial killer and making him or any of the people feel really larger than life. It was always to feel very still visceral and grounded. I wanted to raise more questions and give answers. You know, I wanted the audience to come up with their own judgments of these men, because at the end of the day, the show was really an examination of toxic masculinity and misogyny and where each of these males lies on that spectrum. And life isn't so black and white, like here's a bad guy full of 100% bad and here's a good guy. You know, everyone has some good and bad. And so it was just an examination of that. And so I didn't want the camera to just paint the picture of like, here is a, you know, overly bad guy and not condoning the serial killer, but just, you know, showing him as a human, just as we showed Jimmy Keene as a human.
Yeah, I love that, because I feel like you could have shot their conversations however the hell you wanted it. It wasn't like in Silence of the Lambs, you know, where we're shooting right down the barrel of the lens. It wasn't like something that draws you in and makes you think about the shot while you're watching it. But I love that idea of the mirror image of them. And it was as I recall, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was they were clean shots. They weren't like we weren't seeing a little piece of out of focus shoulder or anything like that in those shots. It was like.
On those particular ones, they were clean. Yeah, when they were center punched. Like
the Roger Deakins thing of almost being in the cameras between the conversation that they're having.
Exactly. And that was the idea. And just like the philosophy as a whole with the cinematography was to stay out of the way. And not so much where we weren't doing anything. I mean, this was very controlled and very lit. But it was never to really show our hand. And a lot of times it was about restraint and not moving the camera. So that when we did move it, when we did push in, or there was some, you know, kind of motion with the camera, it was really purposeful and you felt it. And a lot of things I just wanted to come across, and hopefully it does, more on a subconscious level.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying there from a lot of people who are, especially in the television world, where I feel like there's pressure to just have the camera constantly moving. Like I think about, like this is going back, but the CSI Miami-fication of camera, where it's like you just have a plain old dialogue scene, but you've got two dollies working at the same time in opposite directions. And I feel like almost like in the cinematography world, there's kind of this thing of like, okay, we can move the camera however the hell we want, but like, why?
Why? Exactly. And that's what I didn't want to do, like, because you run the risk of doing that. I think people get tempted to do that, and especially scenes with a lot of dialogue and people just sitting and talking. You feel like you have to do something because you have these tools, and you know, and that's just not my sensibilities to just move the camera just to do it. So it was always like, why, you know, asking ourselves, why are we moving the camera? Why are we framing things a certain way? Why are we on a 40 versus a 50 mil? You know, really, really being intentional. And I wanted to just keep that and preserve that language throughout, you know, never go on longer lenses further back. We rarely did that, only when we specifically wanted that objective perspective, but always staying like in 35, 40, sometimes 50 millimeters, like within this conversation.
What camera was it?
The Mini LF, the Alexa Mini LF.
Okay.
Large format.
Large formats. Yeah. So that means that you were kind of living on wider lenses then for the most part.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those three focal lengths were our hero lenses. That's kind of all we used. Yeah. I could have shot the whole thing with those three lenses.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Now, you said that when they first approached you, they wanted to have one DP shoot the whole thing. Do you know why they wanted one cinematographer? Because I feel like it takes prep time away from you and other directors on subsequent episodes unless they spaced out production somehow. And
they did do that. So it was structured to have one cinematographer. Yeah. So they wanted a singular vision and they wanted that constant. And I appreciated that. And what we did, we shot the first 3 episodes and then we stopped and I prepped with the second director, Jim McKay. And then we shot the 4th episode and then 5 and 6 were shot together. And I had a little break and they were just like 1 week breaks. And I prepped with Joe Chappelle for the last chunk of it.
Now, when you're doing that, and obviously you're working with a showrunner and the showrunner has chosen the director, but when you're working with directors on a show that you established the look on, does the director ever say, hey, I want to, put on a 150 millimeter lens and shoot through this bush? And you're like, yeah, like the look that we've established is this other thing. Does that ever even happen on any level? Are you quality control or at least I understand that the director's in charge, but would you say whatever you want to do, but just so you know, this is the way that we've been doing, that kind of thing?
Yeah, my job was to, fight for the vision and to keep and to hold that integrity of the visual language. And look, and I've heard those stories from other DPs where that has happened, and I know that gets tricky. But in our case, it didn't happen. The other 2 directors came in and they, they had watched all of the cuts of everything we'd shot so far. They liked what we were doing and they totally got it and they didn't try to change anything. So I think it feels, we used all the same, again, the same focal lengths across the board for those episodes as well. We never changed the way, we approached scenes and coverage. And, it's not like we all of a sudden started shooting with 5 cameras and we started spraying down the room. It was very much shot the same way that we had established. So I appreciated that. And I imagine that could get, really hard when you've been on, for months and then you come in with, a stranger who you've never worked with who wants to kind of change it all up. Yeah, but that didn't happen, thankfully.
Well, and also, you brought up working with the showrunner. If you're making a movie, any of your ideas are probably just going to be run by the director and it'll be between you and the director. And I'm sure producers and stuff will have questions or whatever. You're around each other, you talk. But on something like this where you're coming from one person's show running vision and this is their big thing, and you have the director, how much flexibility did you have, or did you have to anything that was outside of the scope of what you had already discussed? Did it have to go through 2 different channels? How does that work?
No, not really. I mean, Dennis did give me a lot of creative freedom. He very much was in control, but he gave everyone a lot of creative freedom, like the actors, remember he told them, these are just the words on the page, feel free to change them up as long as you get the point across. And I mean, his writing is so good, I don't think they end up really changing anything. But he was like that. Yeah, he was like that with me and the production designer and costume designer. And as long as we were, telling the story in the way that he saw it, he gave us a lot of room. So it wasn't that rigid in that way. So if I had an idea and for example, the opening shot of episode 1 was of Jessica Roach, one of the victims, riding her bike down a cornfield.
A haunting, beautiful image.
Thank you. And so that was, something that, really wanted to do is the opener of the series. And, it was it was on a techno crane and it had to be at obviously a specific time of day at magic hour. And we, really had to nail it. And we set out to shoot that on day 3. And on that day, the weather was not playing to our advantage. It was just a cloudy day. I think it rained and we lost time. I think we had to stop because of the weather and we didn't even get to that shot. And we shot some other things with her on a bike for a scene in episode 2 when Greg Kinnear's character is sort of imagining Larry Hall's van pass and imagining Jessica Roach on a bike, and it's more long lens, and it was very specifically for that sequence. So we always planned to go back and pick up the opener at that location, which was an hour and a half away from New Orleans and from our sort of base camp area. And it kept getting punted further and further along. And as they were cutting the episode, they put in one of those longer lens shots of Jessica Roach from that they were using for episode 2 as a placeholder. And everyone was like, including this, yeah, I think this works. And I think, it's serving the purpose and it's fine. And it did work, but it wasn't a show opener, Yeah. And so I was like, God, we have to find a way to shoot this. And so I kept, talking to Dennis and the producers. I'm like, let's please make sure we go back and shoot this, and down to like day 93 out of 95. And we still haven't shot it, and,
oh, man.
And I bring it up again and I kept fighting for it. And I'm like, we have to get this crane. We have to get it out here in this cornfield and we have to do it. I'm telling you, it's worth it. We have to just, gamble it. I have a feeling we'll get good weather. We'll get our sunset, and we have to fight for it. And we finally were able to make it happen on day 95.
Oh my God!
I was such a pain because I kept fighting for it. But we got the sunset, we got the shot, and we got some other bonus stuff. And now it's it's
a strike. It immediately gets your attention. Like it is. It's like these are the stakes of this show. And
I felt like we owed it to Jessica Roach. She needed that magic hour. She needed that light. We needed to give her that. And not that the other shot wasn't good, but it just it was meant for something else. And so that was the thing about, Dennis having trust, although, he was kind of begrudging, oh, God, I don't think we need it. But he still trusted me and still was like, okay, fine. If you say we need it, then let's do it.
Well, it's also kind of the reverse magic of editing is that you fall in love with your temp stuff. And you go like, oh yeah, this temp music works. We don't need to have a real score. Can we license this instead? Or we can live with whatever this grade is. And it's like, no. You got to purge your brain of that stuff and be like, what makes the best show? And, I love hearing stories like that where like, it doesn't sound like it was a fight, but it sounds like something that needed an advocate. And you were the one who needed to step up and advocate for it because as the person who was shooting the whole show, you probably more than anyone except the showrunner had the whole show in your head, because each director's in there doing their bit, but they're not thinking of the whole series,
Exactly. And I felt responsible for that. And you have to know when to pick your battles. Like I couldn't be like that with everything, but I knew that was very important.
I'm ready to move on from Blackbird. Well, actually, the one thing I would like to know is getting that Emmy nomination. Again, like we're just so saturated and there's so many amazing shows going on and so few shows get Emmy nominated. Like, what was it like to know that out of all this amazing television going on that you were one of the ones who was singled out for your work on this?
Yeah, it still feels really surreal and I forget about it and then remember and I'm like, oh, wow, yeah. And I'm just so honored. My first TV series to get an Emmy nomination is a pretty big deal. And it's just hard to believe. But I'm really, really proud of the work and proud of the whole team. And I had an amazing crew who all contributed to the cinematography. But I'm just really, really stoked and honored.
Excellent. So let's go back a little bit. I always want to know from people, what was like the first moment of your life where it occurred to you that cinematography was a career path you could go down, and like what was it that attracted you to that?
When I was like 10, I didn't know I wanted to be a cinematographer, but I knew I wanted to be behind a camera making things.
At 10?
Around 10, because, my parents had a VHS camcorder, and I was like a really creative child, always doing something like creating plays or photo shoots with my Barbies or circuses or puppet shows, or, it was always like a big production. Nothing was ever simple, but so I had a ton of creative energy. So when they brought home the video camera, for home videos, I got my hands on it. It was like, oh, this is another tool in the repertoire. This is like, I could make something, I could film these plays. So that's kind of what ended up happening. I would convert these like stage plays into little films. So I would film them not just like on the stage, but like a little movie. And so that's kind of became what I did. And I remember like one I was really proud of called A Night in the Spooky Mansion. And it was like I got a children's book from the library, and it was like a children's stage play book. And that was one of them. Like, okay, this is cool, because my grandmother lived across the street from this house that felt like this spooky mansion. It was like abandoned, and we were always scared of it. So we shot like all of the exteriors there, and then went across the street to my grandmother's house and shot all of the interiors. So we were running back and forth like a million times because, of course, I'm editing in camera.
Yeah, I was about to say, did you have something to edit on, or were you just shooting it in sequence?
Yeah, shooting in sequence, yeah. But yeah, that idea, I just became obsessed. So I guess was stubborn enough to believe that like maybe I could do this one day, work in movies. So went to college, majored in mass communications. It was like the closest thing I could find to film. That my college didn't have a film
what college?
program. It was the University of Louisiana in Lafayette. But shortly after college, I got a job at a local TV station, and it was in Louisiana. And very small TV station. It wasn't even a news station. It was more like public access-ish. But they gave me my own show that I got to just basically run. So I shot it and directed it and edited it and wrote it. And it was doc style. And I worked with this on-camera host, and we would just go around the area and find, the show was called Unconventional. So we'd find just kind of off the beaten path people, artists, just whoever, and kind of tell their story, just day in the life of. So that was like really my film school, because I didn't go to film school at all, and I just really cut my teeth.
I was waiting for, and then I applied to AFI, but
no, I thought about it, but I didn't have the resources, and it just wasn't feasible. I'd already gone to college, and it just didn't make sense for me. But yeah, the TV station really changed my life. I learned so much. I learned how to operate the camera, and the editing experience. I'm so thankful for that. And I just really learned how to tell a human story. And then I started like freelance camera operating, like in live sports. And I really, really learned how to operate just like live, college and high school football and baseball. And
yeah, you can't ask them to score another touchdown.
Exactly.
You gotta get it right the first time.
And then kind of just started shooting little stuff on the side, like small little local commercials, and then short films and music videos.
All still in Louisiana at this point?
Yeah, all still in Lafayette, Louisiana. And
was there any sense, because I'm assuming that at some point is when the tax incentives hit in Louisiana and there was a big industry there, was there any sense that you could just stay there and have your career there, or did you know you had to move to a bigger production center?
At some point I thought I could. In the back of my mind, I'm like, I think I'm probably going to have to move to LA at some point, but I fought it for a really long time. So I just started shooting more, on my own. And then, I eventually moved to New Orleans, got my first feature, which was a documentary. That led to another documentary. And then that eventually led to our first narrative feature. And then, the project slowly just started getting bigger. Yeah, then eventually moved to Los Angeles.
Yeah, you actually shot a documentary that I saw not that many years ago, Bathtubs Over Broadway, that I thought was just an amazing, for people who are unfamiliar with it, like Bathtubs Over Broadway is about this period of time, I guess it was in the 60s, 70s, maybe.
Or 50s, 60s.
Where they would get like top Broadway composers and singers to do like this corporate work. So
industrial musicals is what they call them. Yeah.
Exactly. They'd be singing about my bathroom or something.
Exactly. It's so funny. You know this. It's so good.
Oh yeah. No. I love that. I love that documentary. I thought it was great, and I actually listened to that album a bunch of times. Like I thought it was. It's always weird when you kind of stumble across a weird subculture of entertainment that you were just unaware of entirely, and it's like you can tell that the people who wrote these were like serious songwriters, they were great musicians doing this corporate work that probably paid more than their theater habit.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was so fun to work on. We met some amazing people, and I kind of identified with that because I'd done a lot of industrials and corporate videos, that I never showed anyone, but that paid the bills so I could shoot short films, on the side. And
So when you sort of steered down the road of cinematographer, it sounds like you were doing directing, editing, producing, basically, and cinematography. What was it about cinematography that pulled you specifically down that road? Because I could just as easily see this story ending with you saying, I'm going to go be a director, or I'm going to go do, or I'm going to go be a producer. I'm going to go open my own production company and make my own stuff. What was it about cinematography that pulled you in that direction?
Yeah, because I was torn between kind of editing and shooting for a minute. And I'd worked as an editor. I got a job at a post house that kind of set up shop in Lafayette. So I got a little taste of editing and I liked it, but I had missed being on set where the action was. So I knew I just couldn't sit in a dark room behind a desk all day. But yeah, cinematography, just being behind the camera, being the one in charge of framing something a certain way, lighting something a certain way, lensing something a certain way to make someone feel a certain way, or show them another perspective, immerse them into another perspective that they hadn't seen before, and maybe change their life by 1 degree. Really just was, I thought, is just such a powerful thing. And finding a unique way or new visual language for every film that I shoot is just completely exciting to me. And how each project is totally different and a blank canvas and an opportunity to just combine the tools of cinematography in a different way than I've done before. And that's what really keeps me coming back.
Excellent. I love that. So before we go, where can our listeners find you online? Are you on social media? Do you like talking to people on social media? Do you have a website? I know you have a website because I went to your website. But
my website, it's my name, nataliekingston.com, and I do Instagram. It's just my name.
Cool. Well, for anyone who hasn't watched it, I can't recommend highly enough. Go check out Blackbird. Episode 3 is the one that you are Emmy nominated for, but it's serialized, so you have to watch the whole thing. But it's really great. See it, if for no other reason, see it to see one of the final performances of the great Ray Liotta, and it's a really great story. I'm really excited that it's out there. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so that was Natalie Kingston. Natalie, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to meet you. Congratulations on your Emmy nom. Best of luck at the Emmys. But really, you're a winner just for getting nominated for an Emmy.
Darn tootin'. That's awesome.
Great looking show.
All right, Ben, it is time to pay some bills.
Yay!
We got to thank our fine friends over at Arri. If you're not familiar with Arri, you're under a pretty big rock. Arri is a multinational...
what are you doing listening to a cinematography podcast if you don't know who Arri is? Come on.
Arri is a multinational corporation based in Munich, Germany. They've been there over 100 years. They have offices in Rome and the U.S. And I actually want to mention today, amongst all the different locations and things that they do, they create all kinds of technology. They've got a stage in London. The Arri London stage is a virtual production stage, and it has a full 360-degree volume. And there's a bunch of images on the website, and we'll put a link in the show notes as well, so you can check out just sort of the capabilities of this. But Arri doesn't do anything halfway. This is an impeccable, amazing production studio. And there's a great article actually on the Arri website about a music video that was shot there recently for the Chemical Brothers. And they have a really cool conceit in this music video, which is there's a dancer inside of an Airstream trailer. And every time she goes in or out of the trailer, the entire world changes. And it's changing because they use Unreal Engine and they have this 360-degree, virtual stage. And the whole video, there might be cuts in it. It doesn't feel like there's any cuts. And so the fact that they've got this sort of cool back and forth, and every time
I need to check that out. Sounds cool.
radically different, radically changes. It's that studio magic. There's that Hollywood magic, the magic of make-believe. Well, they did a really wonderful demo piece here. And if you are in the business and looking for a virtual stage and you're shooting in the UK, you really owe it to yourself to take a look at the Arri Stage London, which is deeply, deeply impressive for the facility and also the capabilities. And we'll put a link to the Chemical Brothers video sort of expose on the Arri website. And man, every time you turn around, Arri's doing something new, doing something cool. No exception here with this one. Check out the Chemical Brothers video and also this information about Arri's virtual stage. It's super cool.
And now, short ends.
All right, Ben, it is time for our famed short end portion of the show. This is where we talk about our weekly obsession. It could be anything. It doesn't even have to be part of the industry, but it often is. What is your obsession this week? What are you all about? Is it a podcast?
No, not this time. It's a news item. It's
a news item.
Entertainment.
Okay. Is it a Trump
item.
Getting indicted in Georgia?
Yeah, sure. But I'll go with you. But no, not really.
Oh, okay.
It's about Avid. Now, if you know me, like our good mutual friend, Ben Hirschleder, he's written books about the Avid. He teaches Avid. He's an amazing Avid editor.
He's a smart cookie too, that guy.
I don't know how I feel. It almost would be good to get Ben on here to talk about it if it goes much further. But basically, Avid Technologies, which doesn't just own Avid, it also owns Pro Tools, which is the leading sound editing software. But anyway, Avid and Pro Tools are for sale, and they're being acquired by supposedly a private equity firm called STG for $1.4 billion. And
chump change.
Avid and Pro Tools are the industry leaders. Name a TV series, there's probably like a 9 out of 10 chance that it's edited in Avid. Avid is the main one. I'm just interested to see where this goes, because it would be, to me, super weird and disruptive to our entire industry if Avid or Pro Tools got absorbed into somebody else, if they were not sold as standalone products of their own as they have been. I mean, maybe if they were combined in the way that DaVinci Resolve put Fairlight, which was one of Pro Tools' competitors, into DaVinci Resolve, so you could edit and then move to another room and edit sound with Pro Tools-like control. I could see them doing that, but Avid, I think that the Avid per month price just for Media Composer is like $50 a month. $50 a month is what you pay for the entire Adobe suite. So that's like Photoshop and After Effects and Audition and Premiere, and then a million web design things that I will never use, and lots of stuff. And that's how much you could pay for just Avid. But I always thought, well, they know their market. Like that's what that market will pay for just that, because it is that much ahead of everyone else in terms of being the leading software for what it does. Yeah,
it's super useful, and it's everywhere.
Yep. In fact, even in the room where I'm recording this, I'm off. My wife and I share an office, and I'm often on this side of the office editing something in Premiere, and she's often on the other side of the very same office using Avid, because she makes house hunters, and that's what they cut house hunters in.
Excellent.
Anyway, just like, let's keep an eye, see where this goes, see if Avid is still recognizable maybe a year or two from now.
Yeah. Who knows what will happen?
So, Ilya, what is your pet obsession of the week?
Oh, I'm taking a page out of your playbook, and it's a podcast.
Oh, no.
which is why I had to joke if you were having a podcast. But yes, I've rediscovered a podcast that I originally think I had started listening to like in 2017, and it's called Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott. Brian Elliott, he's a customer of Hot Rod Cameras. He's bought a ton of equipment from us and has got a studio set up, and he goes out and he shoots these interviews. It's a podcast, it's a YouTube channel, and it's been around for a long time now. And I have to say that he's so good. I listen to his podcast, not just for the people that he has on it, but also to hear him. His interviews are so good, and he is a active listener. He's always got follow-up questions, and he can massage the direction of the conversation. And I'm sure there's probably some editing in this podcast, but it never feels like it. It feels so smooth and so good. You know, I got to say, he's got quite a few people from our industry on Behind the Brand. He says it's a podcast for entrepreneurs, but, you know, he's had like Ken Burns and Rainn Wilson and, authors. He had Malcolm Gladwell. He's had, he's got,
Well, you got to be on your game to talk to Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely. He talked to one of the co-founders of Netflix. He's got really, really fantastic people.
Did he tell him to pay the goddamn writers? Anyway, so go on.
It was some years ago, so I don't think that was going on. I think he even had Tony Hawk on at one point. Here's the thing. He says it's Behind the Brand, and brand is pretty generic because a lot of people can have their sorts of brands things. But because the podcast can talk to so many different types of people and so much stuff, it is not repetitive, and I don't feel like, oh, it's just another one of these. You get to hear a little bit about Brian's story. You get to hear a little bit about his life. It's mostly about his guests, of course, but he figures out ways to work in the small talk into the interview, which just blows me away. I'm completely blown away by this guy as a host. I'm really proud to call him a client. I'm really glad that he shops at Hot Rod. And man, he's just making great stuff. And so I really wanted to call a shout out, and we'll put a link in the show notes at camnoir.com. But if you haven't heard Behind the Brand, give it a listen. I have a feeling there's someone he's had on there that you will likely find interesting. And yeah, pay attention just what an incredible host he is. That guy is just, he's the best. Yeah.
1,000% check that out. Have you ever heard the Jordan Harbinger show?
No, I don't know that one.
Yeah, check out the Jordan Harbinger show. It's similar to what you're talking about. Like he's a great interviewer. He brings on an outrageous diversity of guests. He really has a very distinctive personality, but it's not so Joe Rogan-ish in any way. It doesn't kind of become about him, but he's really smart and incisive. I don't know. Check it out.
All right. So, Ben, I think that just about does it for a show today. Who do we have to thank?
Well, this time we're going to shake it up. No, we're not. It's the same three people. We should start by thanking Alana Cody, who's working her ass off getting us all these kick-ass interviews. And we have one coming up. I don't want to oversell it, but you and I were both on this interview.
No, it's great. It's so good. I can't wait.
I could have talked to this person all day. I was so fascinated with everything they said.
Yeah, it was delightful.
Then we should also thank Ben Katz, who I think we made it medium hard for him today. Like maybe not. I think we just rambled a bit more than we usually do.
He probably needs to edit us a bit.
Yeah. But Ben Katz, who is a phenomenal world-class podcast editor, we appreciate everything that he does for us. You have no idea how hard he's working in the background to make this a tight show. And then last but never least, Kay Zalatracci, who recorded every scrap of music that you have heard in this episode and every episode. You can check him out at musicbykays.com. Hire him to score your next movie, or color correct your next movie, or do CGI for your next movie, or direct your next movie. Does Kays do all those things?
He does.
Kays really does. Yeah. But if you go to Music by Kays, the website is heavily weighted towards his music composition, which is how he got into the business. And he is an amazing composer. Check him out.
All right. So, Ben, I know you already gave it away at the beginning of the show, but where can people find you if they want to track you down?
benrock.com is where I'm at. Check me out. You can find all the links to my social media stuff there. Find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky. I'm on all that crap now. Jesus Christ. Oh, it's a headache. It's a full-time job just reposting the same crap on all these goddamn sites. How about yourself, Ilya? Where can people find you?
Most of the time you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not actually hanging out on LinkedIn, but if you go there and you connect with me, you can get all my contact stuff. But I'm also on a few of the socials, but Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. That's our shop. And if you reach out to me at the shop, I'll get back to you. And if you have a studio that needs building, let me know. You need to build out, you need gear. We are actively doing that right now for someone, and we could do it for you too.
If you have photons you need created or aimed at something or
captured,
recorded onto,
you need the photon pass through one sort of medium into another, we can help you with all those things. Yeah, photons.
You're a photon consultant.
We're a photon consultant. We are a photon enthusiasts. Yeah, we're photon heads over here at Hot Rod for sure.
Get that on a t-shirt, man. All right, well, let's wrap it up. Ilya, you want to take us out?
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.